It's a new day. It's a new dawn. Today, I'll be reading from 3 Bags Full by LEONIE SWANN, chapter 13 today. I love this book. I save all these videos to my YouTube, to my TikTok. I have a playlist titled 3 Bags Full, and I've been audio, video recording chapter by chapter each day. That is my goal as Natalie, the Good Shepherd, in sharing this book, as well as sharing awareness for an eye disease condition called macular degeneration, where we do lose our sight. I did begin reading this book in audio video form to share with my mother, who does have macular degeneration, and she is most excited to be on this journey, my mother with me, in reading a really good, fun murder mystery book of a good shepherd. That's me. I'm a good shepherd. This is a book about not me, and yet it is so fascinating for me because I do have my own pet sheep, and that is who is solving the murder. And this book is the Good Shepherd's flock of sheep. So with that being said, I'm going to hop right into chapter number 13. That's my hat. You can't have it. No, 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 sir. Melmoth, the Wanderer. Let's get started. Chase, what are you doing? Over stick, over stone, stick and stone, stick and stone, stone and bone, stone and bone, and bone and bone and bone. Melmoth's hooves hammered over the wintry ground. His heartbeat galloped on ahead of him. Stick and stone. The butcher's dogs were howling. The carrion eater himself came behind them. Melmoth and Richfield called the butcher carrion eater because he smelled of death, and they thought he was too portly to kill anything for himself. But now it looked as if the butcher had joined the hunters after all, and Melmoth was running for his life. Stone and bone, stone and bone. What are you doing, Chase? You wouldn't dare, Richfield had said, with all the superiority of the older twin, and the fact that Richfield was only a couple of seconds older than Melmoth didn't make things easier. Melmoth just felt annoyed. He hadn't thought to ask if Richfield himself would dare. It wasn't about that. It wasn't about any of the other sheep. It was only about him. Melmoth had stopped grazing. He turned his head and looked at the place where the countryside began to roll gently away from the meadow, hill after hill after hill. I would dare, he had said, looking straight at the derisive expression on Richfield's face. I just have to pause for a second. I have 40 birds here on my little small hobby farm, and they're all laying eggs right now, and so they're all loud and just everywhere. And I love it because this is a time for me to read out loud to not only myself and for my mother, and to share on my social media. My flock is also enjoying this little story here. See? Stick and stone, stone and bone. Melmoth couldn't remember when and where he had learned these words. They were simply the right words. They helped him not to think of the carrion either. Even the butcher didn't matter. He just had to run on, over stick and over stone, with his legs flying and his breath steady. As long as he kept going, the butcher didn't matter. But Melmoth's breath wasn't steady anymore. There was too much cold air outside and too little warm air in his lungs. Stone and bone, on and on forever. 3 days and 3 nights, Richfield had said, or it doesn't count. No, Melmoth had said, not 3. Richfield snorted scornfully. Or it doesn't count. Any suckling lamb can spend a night lost in the fields or 2. 5, said Melmoth. I'll be gone 5 days and 5 nights. He enjoyed the sight of Richfield's baffled, sheepish face. 5 days and 5 nights, he sang. 5 suns and 5 moons. 5 blackbirds and 5 nightingales. He pranced around Richfield, kicking out in high spirits. For a moment, Richfield looked worried. Then he let Melmoth's good humor infect him. 5 blackbirds and 5 nightingales, he sang too. And next moment, they were both romping merrily around the meadow. Neither of them thought for a second that anyone would go hunting Melmoth. Over stick and over stone, most of all over stone. So many stones, and they didn't make running any easier. Don't catch a cold, Richfield had said awkwardly. Look, come here, little lady, come here. You just want to be held. Come here. Here, let's read, okay? Oh, stick and stone, stone and bone. Melmoth couldn't remember when and where he had learned these words. They were simply the right words. They helped him not to think of the carrion either. Even the butcher didn't matter. Oh, wait, look at me. I just got flustered and I just started back. Listen, this is no good. 5 minutes in, I'm flustered and fleathered. Let's begin. Don't catch a cold, Richfield had said, awkwardly. Melmoth flung his head proudly up. His eyes were sparkling. What did Richfield know about the dangers of being alone? Catching a cold was certainly not among them. Melmoth had thought about it for days and had concluded that those dangers didn't exist, just fantasies. Nightmares dreamed up by frightened suckling lambs, horror stories told by anxious mother ewes. What did the sheep do in the flock? They grazed and rested. What would he do without a flock? Graze and rest, of course. Anything else was just imagination. There were no dangers, not a single one. Walls of rock. The moon had come out from behind clouds in the sky, and Melmoth could see rock walls flying past to the right and left of him. Not very high, but too high and too steep for a sheep. Stick and stone, stone and bone, stone. Now it was all over, and the walls of rock were closing around him into a cul-de-sac. He must climb those rocky walls. He must! There was a place that didn't look quite so steep to his left. A collection of detritus, a natural ramp. Melmoth stumbled up it. Things went quite well. Look at me. You know I always like to... This is me, Natalie. I need to circle these words. Where did that go? A collection of detritus? Melmoth stumbled up it. Things went quite well at first, but then little stone falls came loose, kicked away by his hooves. It was like trying to run across falling rain. Impossible. The carrion eater seemed to sense it too. There was a terrible shout as he called off his dogs. They weren't needed now. Footsteps shuffled through the silence. They shuffled fast. Melmoth was defeated. His fear was defeated too. In the last seconds of his life, Melmoth made up his mind to be a truly brave sheep. He would stand and face the butcher. Slowly and trembling, he climbed down the pebbly slope again. Stone and bone. Stone and bone. And bone. A leg bone was sticking out of the pebbles he had dislodged in his flight, a bone inside a human leg. Of course he had caught a cold after all on the very first night, huddled into a prickly hawthorn hedge and hardly protected at all from the icy November wind. He hadn't slept. He'd just listened to the sounds all around him and longed for day. Things were in fact better in daytime now and then anyway. Melmoth had roamed the gray-green wintry moorland with his nose dripping, cautiously nibbling at tufts of coarse grass. Around midday he found himself on a hill that offered a very good view to a sheep with good eyesight. Melmoth had excellent eyesight, and he immediately turned it on the blue strip of sea on the horizon. He pretended it was to get his bearings. Secretly, he was looking for white woolly dots, but he saw nothing. Not even a cloud in the sky, whichever way he looked. He was alone all the way to the horizon. A ridiculous feeling of euphoria crept down from his head into his legs, and he strained his eyes even more so as to see even farther in his isolation. When the euphoria began turning to panic, Melmoth galloped away through the empty hills, zigzagging wildly. He clambered cautiously over the human leg, bone and stone, until he had firm ground underfoot again. What a relief! Melmoth disappeared into the shadows at the foot of the pebbly mound and listened. The dogs were panting and the butcher was breathing hard. "He's in the old stone quarry," said the butcher. "We've got him now." Said a familiar voice. Melmoth watched as two white clouds of light emerged from the darkness, saw the dog's hot, steaming breath and the massive, deep black figure of the butcher. Melmoth was trembling, but only with exhaustion. He heard everything, everything. The whining of the dogs and their slobbering heartbeats, the clink of moonlight on the cold ground, a night bird's wings beating, even the velvety sound of the night itself slowly moving on. It was his 5th night and his last. The butcher had brought a light with him. Melmoth watched it darting around, climbing the rocky walls, coming closer and closer. The light hesitated for a moment at the foot of the pebbly ramp. Then it hopped its way up the slope, over stone and bone, without dislodging a single pebble. The light was a good hunter, leaping from the slope into the shadows, making straight for Melmoth. For a moment he stood blinking at the dazzling white. Then everything went black around him. "Oh, shit," said the butcher. "What's the matter? Has something happened to him?" asked George, who was lagging a little behind the butcher. "I told you not to go chasing after him like that. Not at night. Not when he—" George fell silent for a moment. Then he said, "Oh, shit!" Forcing himself to open his eyes, Melmoth gradually succeeded in fending off the blackness again. Now he could see what had happened. The light had swung away from him once more. It had gone climbing the pebbly slope again and had fastened on that solitary human leg bone. Only now did Melmoth realize how unlikely it was to find a human leg in this place. It was pointing to the night sky, pale and hairless and smelling of death. The light began shaking. The butcher took a couple of steps back. Only the dogs were still showing any interest in Melmoth, who stood there in the shadow of the pebbly slope, breathing heavily. "George," said the butcher. His voice didn't sound at all terrible now. "Do you think it would be a good idea to leave?" George's thin figure stood perfectly still in the dark. He shook his head. "We've seen it. Not a pretty sight." "Me too. I'd rather we'd just found Melmoth and nothing." "Too late. We have to go through with it now." "Shit!" "Shit," agreed the butcher. He had taken a step back. "Will you pull him out?" he asked. George half turned to the butcher, and Melmoth could smell that he wasn't angry anymore. "Ham," he said, "you're a butcher." And Melmoth could smell that he wasn't hungry anymore. "You are a butcher. You do this kind of thing every day. Theoretically, I was hoping that you—" "That's different. Completely different. My God, George, this is a body." George shrugged. "Did you think you worked with some kind of fruit in your job?" He climbed the slope and more pebbles came away. He took his work gloves out of the pockets of his jacket and put them on. He pulled at the leg. A whole lot of pebbles came away as a large body made its way to the surface. Melmoth took a step back so that the stones wouldn't hit his own legs. Stone and bone. The butcher made a sound rather like a lamb suckling, a wet, smacking sound. "It's Weasel," said the butcher. "Weasel McCarthy." George, who until now had been tugging grimly at the leg, looked down. A second leg had emerged beside it, topped by a thin torso, 2 thin arms, and a surprised, dead, weaselly face. The arms and legs were at odd angles. "Stiff," said George. The butcher nodded. "After about 8 hours, they have to be processed by then." He clapped his hand awkwardly to his mouth as if to catch back what he'd said out to the clear night air. George shrugged again. "McCarthy was always a bit stiff," he said. Then they both looked as if they regretted having said anything. The dogs were sniffing curiously at McCarthy. Melmoth could easily have made his escape at this point, but he was too tired. Listening to the velvety sound of night slipping away, he stood there in silence. George bent over McCarthy. "Well, not a natural death. Look at that, Ham." Ham nodded, but he didn't come any closer. "Suppose we just fetch the police?" he suggested. George nodded. "If it was anyone else, yes, but not McCarthy. Think about it, Ham. There's something very wrong here. And, like I said, not a natural death." Melmoth couldn't see anything unnatural about McCarthy. A number of small wounds on the upper part of his body and his arms. Some of them harmless, not much more than bruises. But there were some sharp stab wounds, too, looking as if a knife had made them. The fatal injury was probably the one on the head, where thick, cold blood covered greasy hair. All perfectly natural. "I can't see enough here. Give us a bit more light, Ham, will you?" "Over here, not back there," George sounded annoyed. "You're standing in the way," said Ham. "I can't shine the light through you. Move aside." "I can't move aside." That was true. George was in the middle of the narrow slope, the only place where a big 2 legs like him had room to stand without falling over. "Then he'll have to come down here," panted the butcher. "There's nothing else for it." George tried to pull McCarthy out of the heap of stones, but the body's stiff limbs resisted. George turned to Ham. "Don't just stand there. Do something." The butcher sighed. He took George's gloves, put them on his huge butcher's paws as best he could, and climbed up the slope. A great many pebbles rolled down. He took hold of the corpse by one foreleg and one hind leg with an expert grip and heaved it up and then down to George's feet with a single movement. For a moment, the butcher moved as elegantly as a steel in the water. Something heavy clattered over the stones behind McCarthy. My flock is going crazy right now. "Here," the butcher pointed to the back of McCarthy's head. "Blow on the back of the head." "With that, I guess." The butcher pointed to the thing that had clattered down after McCarthy. Melmoth cautiously searched the air for its scent. Just a spade, the kind George used in his vegetable garden. "Here's a nice piece of work. Why all this nonsense was necessary?" The butcher pointed to McCarthy's upper body. "I can't imagine. Just makes him nervous." It's unnatural. George shook his head. A real murder. Who'd have believed it? The butcher looked at George in alarm. We really ought to go to the police. Just a moment, said George. Just a moment. We must think first. We've stumbled into a right old mess here. Think McCarthy, of all people. What might that connect up with? Who would they suspect? Who'd have had a reason to kill McCarthy? Josh, of course, for one. Sam, Patrick, and Gary, said the butcher. Michael and Healy. George nodded. Eddie, Dan, Brian, O'Connor, Sean, and Nora. Adrian and little Dennis, said the butcher. Leary, Harry, and Gabriel. You for another, said George. You too, said the butcher quickly. Well, everyone, really, except maybe for Lily. The butcher waved his hand dismissively. George bent over McCarthy again. Just about anyone could have done it. Ham nodded. Some would have done it better. Some worse. You'd have done it better, said George. If we go to the police now, the first thing we'll have to prove is that it wasn't us. We need... He pushed his cap back on his head. Melmoth knew that George was thinking hard when he pushed his cap back on his head. We need an alibi. The only question is, when for? Can you say roughly how long he's been dead? Said the butcher. I keep them in the cold store, of course, but it's not what you'd call hot here either. So supposing he was a pig, I'd say at least, let's put it at 4 days. Only if you're lazy, of course, and don't process the animal at once, and then you're in trouble. And suppose he'd been in the warm for some time and he'd only just been brought here. Even then, said the butcher, at least 3 days. See these bruises? 2 days for them to come out, and as noticeable as this, 3 days, I'd say. George's cap was pushed even farther back onto his head. 3 days. 3 days ago was Sunday. I was out at the caravan, thought I'd have a nice restful day for once, and you were probably sitting alone watching the telly. Ham nodded, embarrassed. A bad business, a very bad business, muttered George. If we report this now, they'll turn our homes over, and they'll search the whole caravan. That's all I need. Me, end up in jail because of McCarthy? I say we leave him here. The next person can find him. George turned and marched firmly off the way they had come. The butcher whistled to his dogs and followed him with long, hasty strides. Melmoth stood beside McCarthy and watched them go. Even in his deep and woolly weariness, he was surprised. The carrion eater in flight from a dead body? Who'd have believed it? Melmoth watched his certain death trudging away again. Trudge, trudge, stone and bone, trudge. The butcher stopped and turned. A deathly cold crawled over Melmoth's horns and into his head. He couldn't bear to die again today. First the fear, sour and steamy, then courage in the face of death, rigid but clear, then relief, soft and soupy, and now fear again. Melmoth knew he couldn't be brave a second time, not now. What's the matter? Asked George. He had stopped too. I have this funny kind of feeling, said the butcher, as if we'd overlooked something. Melmoth froze. George laughed bitterly. If you ask me, we'd have done better to overlook a whole lot more. But the carrion eater was on the move, coming Melmoth's way. Trudge, trudge, stone and bone. There's something wrong, muttered the butcher. Something doesn't fit. If only I knew what. Melmoth closed his eyes. This was the moment of final surrender to the carrion eater. Any moment, he'd remember what was wrong. And then, well, it wasn't much use keeping his eyes closed. Trudge, trudge over stone. Melmoth could smell the hot, rancid scent of the butcher coming towards him. In the shop, muttered Ham. In the shop today. 3 pieces of pork loin for Kate. Then Josh comes for his 10 kilos of minced beef. He needs it for the pub. And there was 20 sausages for Sam's birthday. No, that wasn't it. Josh, and his 10 kilos of mince. The butcher stopped again, so suddenly that George stumbled into him and swore. Damn it, Ham! Damn it! Are you off your head? But Ham was not to be distracted. And then there were the pickled pork ribs. Can't remember who bought those now. Maybe Dan or Eddie. And then there was someone else, but I'm sure about Josh. Josh told me McCarthy was in the Mad Boar yesterday. Josh was pretty sour about that, said McCarthy's plans had all passed the authorities, nothing to be done about it now. Yesterday, he said, that was yesterday. George whistled through his teeth. It was the whistle he normally used to call up Tess to round the sheep up. Tess was still quite young, and sometimes it didn't work. But Tess wasn't here today, and it worked even less well on the butcher's dogs. I can't make it out, said the butcher, who was drinking in the Mad Boar yesterday. The butcher briefly shone the light on McCarthy. Its beam brushed past Melmoth. Not him, for one. Are you sure Josh said yesterday? Asked George. The butcher nodded. Yesterday. If you don't believe me, I'm sure I have it on the CCTV video. There's no sound on that, is there? Said George. Yes, there is, said Ham. George raised his eyebrows, but the butcher went on undeterred. I did wonder. They ignore McCarthy for weeks, and suddenly there's 3 or 4 people talking about him? Well, I thought to myself, if it's all out in the open now. George struck his forehead with the palm of his hand. Melmoth knew that this gesture was kept for the big ideas in George's life, like the idea of putting luminous paint on rats so as to see which hole they used for getting into the shepherd's caravan, or the idea that it was Maple stealing the syrup from his bread, or the idea that you could catch Melmoth by catching Richfield, because Melmoth and Richfield went together like sandy ground and seagrass. When George struck his forehead with the palm of his hand, he was always right. It was them, said George, all of them. The butcher looked at him blankly. Who do you mean? He asked. Well, exactly. Which of them I don't know, said George, but a lot of them. A whole bunch of them. So many that all of them in the boar yesterday are in it together. My God, Ham, think. They just decided to do it the way they decided that the village hall needed a new roof, those bastards. And they hid him here? Now they're going around telling everyone he was in the boar yesterday, and once he's found a bit later, when the time of death can't be so easily established, they'll all have wonderful, well, alibis, dating from yesterday onwards. Appointments with lawyers and doctors, trips to town. You only have to watch them over the next few days, and you'll soon see. But, the butcher waved his fat arms about helplessly, you mean all of them? O'Connor too? Fred too? I don't know exactly who actually did it, Ham, said George irritably, but everyone who was in the Mad Boar yesterday was in on it anyway, and probably some who weren't. I guess whoever really pulled the strings kept well out of that business with the pub. But suppose I'd gone to the boar. I thought about it. Sure I did. There was nothing on TV. Then McCarthy would have only just left, or he wouldn't have turned up yet, or they'd have seen him in the supermarket or at the playground telling the kids about his bloody plans. If there's enough of them in it all together, it comes to the same thing. I just don't believe it, wailed the butcher. I mean, they all buy my sausages, my chops, and they're murderers all of a sudden? I don't believe it. That's human nature, and you'd better get used to it, said George. But the butcher wasn't really listening. My joints of beef. How can I go on selling them joints of beef when I know for sure that they killed a man? For a moment, Ham's breath hovered soundlessly in the cold air. George suddenly froze. Shut up, Ham, he growled through his teeth, very quietly. When George was very quiet, it was important. But there was no stopping Ham now. They won't get any more meat from me, none at all, he announced angrily. Ham, George spat. Something about the expression on George's face made Ham stop. That soundless breath hovered in the air again, and there were footsteps. Footsteps on stone. Footsteps rapidly retreating. Then silence. Shit, said George. Shit, said the butcher. Neither man said anything for a moment. George sighed. Well, now they know. We were okay up to this point. Now we really are in the shit. The butcher's eyes widened. His scent changed to a bitter, sourish note. The carrion eater was afraid. George, you don't mean they'd... George, they liked us. They didn't like McCarthy. George shook his head. They killed McCarthy just for a bit of cash. What do you think they'll do with their own skins at stake? The bastards, Ham clenched his fists. Security, that's the thing. You have to safeguard yourself. You always have to safeguard yourself. I'm not going to make it that easy for them. You always have to safeguard yourself, thought Melmoth. But how, though? The butcher went on. We stumbled into this mess like idiots. Now they know. What's going to help us now? Thinking will help, said George. We have to find their weak points. Find their weak points, thought Melmoth. Thinking will help. They don't have any weak points, the butcher sighed. There are so many of them. You know how it is, George. One crow doesn't peck another's eyes out, and if there are so many of them all in it together, he flailed his meaty arms about at a loss. Don't panic, Ham. Think. There are always weak points. There are always weak points, thought Melmoth. He would never have thought that George and the butcher could say so many clever things. George pushed his cap back from his forehead again. Well, we have a little time. They'd have to discuss it first. None of them will dare act alone. We're outsiders now, said the butcher. His voice was trembling. Don't you see, George? There's no going back. Once you're out for good. Oh, shit! Now the butcher's whole large frame was trembling. George put a soothing hand on his shoulder. It looked rather funny because Ham was so much taller than George. Ham, did you ever herd sheep? Ham shook his head. A flock of sheep can be herded because you know something about them. You know they'll stay together. They'll do all they can to stay together. That's why you can herd them. You can't herd a single sheep on its own. A sheep on its own is unpredictable. Sometimes being alone is an advantage. Melmoth and the butcher were listening to George wide-eyed. If we're outsiders now, we'd better exploit the situation, George went on. Find evidence. Your CCTV video, that's not a bad idea. And you sell newspapers in the shop, too. Ham looked doubtfully at George. Newspapers? Yes, but... Good, George nodded, pleased. Are they in view on the video? Because then we can prove it about the date. Ham nodded with his jaw dropping. What George was driving at seemed to be gradually sinking into him. But George had been thinking some more. Excellent, he murmured, excellent. There are a lot of them, and a whole crowd together don't risk anything. We'll make sure the police find McCarthy right away, and you make copies of that video. Then we'll hide the cassettes, and if anything happens to us, it will all get out. If anything happens to us, it will all get out, repeated the butcher. Yes, right, they'll soon find out what I'm like. I'll be at the lawyers with all that stuff tomorrow, and my will, to be opened on my death. George nodded. Only they'll have to know about it as soon as possible, or it'll do us no good at all. First thing tomorrow, said the butcher firmly. The first customer to walk into my shop will know. They turned again and walked off even faster than the first time. But then George turned and beamed at Melmoth. Melmoth, he said in a friendly tone. Come here, boy. Ham snorted crossly. How can you stop to think about that animal now? Because he's mine. My lost sheep. Which of us goes to church every Sunday, eh? Come on, Melmoth. George was enticing him with his friendliest voice. The I've got a slice of Mangelwurzel here voice. Melmoth could sense that George didn't have a slice of Mangelwurzel there. All the same, he would have liked to go with him back to the flock. But he couldn't. No going back. Once you're out for good. Melmoth was alone. He must stay alone now. Sometimes being alone is an advantage. He retreated from George, step by step until his hindquarters came up against a rock. George kept on coming. He took Melmoth's young horns in a friendly grasp with one hand, the way he'd done many times before. Melmoth fought against that grasp as he had never fought anything in his life. In the end, George gave up. Want me to help? Asked Ham. George shook his head. It's useless. He doesn't want to come. Suddenly, George had a knife in his hand. He came towards Melmoth again and took hold of the wool right beside his throat, looking for something. Melmoth stood perfectly still. Then George found what he was looking for. A narrow thread buried deep in Melmoth's fleece. He cut it through. A key clinked as it fell and lay on the ground, smooth and shining. George bent down and picked it up. He sighed. Melmoth could remember the day when George had tied that key around his neck. Because you're the wildest of the bunch, George had said. Not Richfield, although he carried his horns so high, but Melmoth. It had been a great day for him. George walked away without once turning back. Are you crazy, George? Cried Ham. First we spend all day looking for the creature, now you just leave it there? What's the idea? It'll run off to join the first flock he can find. A sheep without a flock? No one ever heard of such a thing. It'll never make it. Oh, yes, he'll make it. Melmoth heard George say as two pale cones of light disappeared into the darkness. And there we have it. The end of chapter 13. 3 Bags Full by LEONIE SWANN. Read by me, the Good Shepherd, Natalie. Listen down, my flock is all quiet now. Everybody's chilling and laying eggs here and there and everywhere, and now coming back out to say hello to me.